Welcome to the first episode of season 2 of the Big Talk. That's in Matjato to discuss Sekhametsi Investment Consortium, which is a Basotho-owned company which is worth over $1 billion Maluti. So it wouldn't be such a bad idea to say this episode is worth over $1 billion. Sekhametsi Investment Consortium has been operating in Lesotho for more than 2 decades now, and among your portfolio in textile manufacturing, banking, property, telecommunication. How did the Sekhametsi Investment Consortium start?
Okay. To be more precise, we started in 2000. And this was specifically in response to a program that was undertaken by government of Lesotho, where a number of state-owned enterprises were being privatized. I mean, this ranged from investments in financial services. Very few of us would remember that Lesotho Bank went under and got sold and became Standard Lesotho Bank, Lesotho Agricultural Development Bank, Lesotho Building Finance, the Post Office, but at that time it was the Lesotho Postal Services Scheme, and a few others. Then there was also Lesotho Airways. There was another company called PVPS. But our interest was in telecommunications. In telecommunications, 2 stakes were being sold. A stake in the Telkom Lesotho, and also a stake in the then very young organization called Vodacom Lesotho. And by this time, government owned 100% in Telkom Lesotho, but it owned about 12% in Vodacom Lesotho. So they kept the stake in Telkom Lesotho and sold the stake in Vodacom Lesotho. That's basically how we came about. So as happens with these things, you put in terms of reference, you ask people to bid to buy the stake, and a few people got together and decided, guys, telecommunications will grow. So let's form a consortium of Basotho businesses, Basotho individuals, and bid for this stake. So that's how Sekhametsi came about. So fundamentally, although you are in all of the sectors that you're talking about, we started off specifically being an investor in a telecommunications company, in a specific telecommunications company.
For a long time, Basotho had been skeptical about joining such initiatives or shows, thinking, how did you navigate in such a perception?
It was fairly easy. We were aware that Basotho was skeptical. I mean, at the time, Basotho had just experienced some horrific incidences where grandmothers would be putting together some money and they take it to somebody as smooth as you are, and then in a certain building, and after a while, the people just disappear with the money. So we are aware, one, we needed to have a presence. So the first thing we did was to get an office. Secondly was to make sure that when we report to our members, we have a consistent reporting. So right at the inception, we had an information pack. The information pack explained exactly what I've explained. What were we doing? How will people see growth? That this wasn't a savings scheme, it was an investment scheme. We explained how an investment works. And then we also decided that we would have as many regular meetings of members as possible. So by the time we were 18 months into formation, we had already probably called over 12 general members meetings where we explained the finances, we explained the strategy and the whole lot. And we kept them along all the time. We look back now after 20 years and say it was so critical that we had that stakeholder engagement. If we had not done it, people would have misinterpreted what we were trying to achieve. It wasn't the case in this instance, because if you weren't quite sure what I was explaining to you, you waited until you went to the next general meeting, and you could take us back in the general meeting to ask questions like, why form a company as opposed to forming a cooperative, and all those things, and we provided answers to the best of our ability in those areas.
There's a train of thought which indicates that Basotho cannot work together, especially in business. What has been your secret for the past duration?
Well, first of all, we challenged that thought, and we wanted to challenge that thought. Basotho cannot work together. We had one of older members in our group, passionately, a gentleman called Dr. Moteane. And Dr. Moteane used to say, but Basotho are already working in corporations. He would use the example of M1.1 and say, Basotho faithfully every month meet to pay over 10 rand for a burial society. So this is exactly the same thing, but this time around is for purposes of investing. I think that initial analogy helped us to really get focused in going forward. Of course, it is not quite M1.1, because in M1.1 we are all the same, but in this one you had shareholding, so we are all different shareholders. But basically that was the concept. Someone else came in and said, Basotho have been doing Matsema for years, where we basically form a Moho society where we work together on your field, and then we move to my field, and we move to my field. So that's the analogy, that's the example we use, and that's what really carried us through.
We have had coronavirus. Coronavirus has had an impact in Lesotho, especially on businesses' operations. Across the spectrum of your portfolio, what strategies have you employed to curb the negative ripple effect?
We work this way in Sekhametsi. We meet, the board meets regularly. So immediately when COVID came along, we met and we tried to answer exactly the same question. We went and we looked, and what we asked was that, what do you need to do to navigate through COVID? And this was the lessons we learned. One, you need to be in the industries or in the sectors that will create employment, because after COVID you're going to need employment. We also said you need to understand which companies and services would be required through COVID and beyond. So we looked at, say, where we invested already, which was Vodacom. It was telecommunication sector, and we realized we are already on the right sector. We then looked in textiles and said, what are we doing in textiles? And we invested in textiles. We looked also in financial services and said, okay, we are in the right sector. So for COVID, we're in the right sectors, provided we did the right things. So for example, in the telecommunication sector, pricing is always a problem. But you needed to make sure that as a telecommunications company in these times, you really look at your pricing. For example, when this thing broke out, some of the services on the M-Pesa system were lowered, if not suspended, because you realize that people needed the service and you need them to meet them somewhere. Data, the cost of data and availability of data to vulnerable sections, that's also something that one needed to do that. So again, the last thing we try to understand which companies will survive COVID. And we should be in those companies if we could.
In terms of your response to COVID-19, especially looking at corporate social responsibility. How has Sekhametsi Investment Consortium approached the pandemic?
We approached it this way. We decided we wouldn't do food parcels because everyone else was doing food parcels. We also decided that we would look at the sectors in which we can provide PPE. And we provided PPE to the nursing society and also to the police. Then we also created a fund, and this fund is supposed to help us in food security. It's a bit slow in really taking off, but it's there. We've got a steering committee, we've got guidelines. We are saying we want to help young farmers. By young we mean 35 and below. And they come up with proposals of what if they understand our concept of food security, to say, to make Lesotho more food secure, this is what we are going to do. And we will provide seed money into such an adventure. We expect the money back, and then when the money backs with very little charge, when the money comes back, we will then create a revolving fund. So hopefully going forward, there will be a long-term relationship between young farmers and ourselves, which was initially indicated as or initiated as a COVID response.
Is the program still ongoing?
The program is still ongoing. We have dedicated $1 million Maluti for the seed money. The criteria for how it's going to be dished out is still being worked out. What we also try to do in Sekhametsi is that we don't do the work because we could stuff it up. So what we really do, we create a task force from our broad membership, and so we have a committee of farmers and people experienced in this thing to actually help us through this proposal. So if you're already thinking of going out of media into farming, we'll see. But generally, that's what we do.
There are allegations against a company that you have a stake in, which is Vodacom. The allegations were leveled by Lesotho Communications Authority that Vodacom is floating some terms in your license numerous times. But later on, Lesotho Communications Authority revoked their license, and then, however, High Court decided to give you the interim order to operate. What is your influence on that? In that, if there is any, when it comes to solving this impasse without the cause?
Okay. Maybe we should put Vodacom Lesotho into context of Sekhametsi. Not only were we established to buy a stake in Vodacom Lesotho, so it's the very reason for our existence. Over 20 years it has remained so. As follows. When you look at that 1 billion value you are referring to, 72% of that is the value we hold in Vodacom Lesotho. So it's a big number for anybody. When you look at where we get income today, or our revenue, 81% of our revenue comes from Vodacom Lesotho. So Vodacom Lesotho is key for us. Vodacom Lesotho is peculiar, or telecommunications company are peculiar in that they are a regulated industry, which means the regulator basically controls your life and your livelihood. We are very much aware of those facts. So in this instance, although the matter is still in the courts, as early as 2019, we wanted to intervene. And our intervention was simply to say, Vodacom Lesotho and regulator, please work at whatever differences you have in a cordial manner. Please avoid going to courts if you can, unless if one is so clear that their rights were being trampled upon on one side, or one was so clear that there was a gross non-compliance. And this is a very difficult state to be. But as Sekhametsi, we definitely would want issues between LCA and VCL resolved, because VCL and telecommunications is key for us. And that's basically our approach to that. We think if things are correct, this is what should happen. VCL and LCA should resolve their issues, and they should be helped by the shareholders of VCL, which is ourselves and Vodacom Group on one side, and government of Lesotho as represented by the Ministry of Telecommunications, Science and Technology on the other side. In our view, telecoms are so pivotal to the life of our economy. There's a statistics that says that for every 5% of increase in the teledensity, in the number of people using phones, you have a corresponding 2% increase in the gross national domestic product, GDP. So this is too important for everybody, ourselves and everybody else, the nation as a whole. This thing needs to be resolved, and that's how we appeal to the thing. We don't prejudge why parties are in court, and we're saying the courts are there for a reason. They'll sort it out. But if it could be solved out of court, the better.
What is your stance or your position as shareholders? What is your position or stance, or as Sekhametsi? What is your position or stance as Sekhametsi Investment Consortium in this thread of having your license revoked?
Look, we hope we'll get, or VCL will get, its full access to the license, not an interim access back, and that matter will be resolved. We also will do everything in our power to ensure that VCL voluntarily adheres to full compliance of its license conditions. When we take up this debate with VCL, and through our directors who are also sitting on VCL, we are convinced that they are not too far from full compliance. In fact, there are arguments, but then let's wait for the courts to decide, is that they have been complying to some degree. But let's have a look out. This thing is in court. Let's also allow the courts to determine, because basically the relationship between the regulator and a regulatee is that the regulator will determine, but if you don't quite agree with the regulatee, there's a provision that you can appeal, and you appeal to the courts, and we just hope that should be done. What we need is that there's compliance, that the rollout of 5G is accelerated without any undue dependency on any particular geopolitical force. So whether it's China or US or wherever, we should just have rollout 5G. We should also just roll out mobile money, and we would be happy. That's what we aim for.
In the genesis of this saga, there was a brouhaha of MTN coming in Lesotho to be a competitor or to take over where Vodacom will live. What is your comment on that? Is there space for MTN in Lesotho?
Look, you wouldn't believe me, because I would have a vested interest in saying this. But there will always be attempts by a new entrant into the Lesotho market to come. The profitability of the Lesotho networks are good, and so on and so forth. But the studies that have been conducted by the World Bank, probably by LCA itself, is that there isn't really much room. It's been argued that if it's down the value chain, away from the network operators, these guys that sort of live off the mobile network operators, such as virtual networks and all those are the guys that probably there's a room in the market. But we wouldn't stop MTN from coming into Lesotho at all. We would compete. We would hope Vodacom Lesotho would aggressively compete, and we'd hope Vodacom Lesotho will be able to win, because it's been in the country for so long.
Please tell us your secret on what is it that when you invest in businesses, the successful as an organization.
Okay. We've always taken a minority stake in these businesses, except in property where we haven't. But where you have operational, we like a minority stake, a significant minority stake, because someone else is bringing the know-how. What do we bring to the party? We bring an intimate knowledge of the country and how to navigate into the country. So that combination does sort of works well for us. That's what we look for. And we look also for sectors that are exciting. But that's not what we looked for in the last acquisition we just made, which is buying 30% in the textile industry. There we simply looked at the ability to create jobs for that in that particular sector. So in textiles, we'll probably go more into textiles because it can employ a lot of people. And the more Basotho are employed, probably they will also use the services that we have invested in. So put it in simplistic terms. If bomme ba bangata ba sebetsa di factory ba tla letsa, and difono di tla sebediswa more, and we will benefit. And that's our strategy.
Can you please talk about Stanley deal? How did that come about?
A Stanley deal came about this way. The Stanley was collecting money in country, and it had no local presence. So we came on board to provide the local presence in that regard, and basically that's what we provided. But we did more than that. We also then made Stanley understand what Basotho investors were looking for, because we live among them, and that's what we've carried through.
Lesotho has a worrying crisis of youth unemployment, which is 40% according to UNDP Index report 2015. What strategies have you adopted as Sekhametsi to make sure to eradicate the problem that we have?
Okay, youth, my favorite subject. This is what Sekhametsi can do for the youth. One, it can encourage the youth to. I was 35 when I joined Sekhametsi. We can create a few more Sekhametsis with youth, by the youth, for the youth. That would help, because then the youth will be taking control of the economy. We are, as Sekhametsi, going to be We are in our 20th year. We've rebranded ourselves. We are saying we are regenerating ourselves for a better tomorrow or a better future. But that future that we are regenerating for, I won't be around for it. So what Sekhametsi need to do is perhaps to take about 20% of its value and target to sell it to youth. If we did that at a very high level, we sold 20% of ourselves to youth. That means youth will be owning between 4 to 6% of Vodacom Lesotho, let alone the other companies in which we've invested. That immediately would stop saying we want to create work for the youth. The youth will be amongst us, telling us what sectors we would go into to create employment. And that's how we want to do the youth, not lip service. We have young shareholders now. We have one 22 years old. Is keeping us all running around, because when we complain that we want dividends and we can't invest in eventually, Vusi doesn't see that, because Vusi wants money when he's 52, not when he's 22. So he wants to make sure that we invest for the future. So we need to bring youth into us so that we can be able to look and see what the future looks like.
Growth of any company can really shareholder. In terms of diversification, which sectors are you willing to invest in the future?
Okay, we started off as a one horse race in telecoms. We then moved very sheepishly into property, financial services, now textile. We need to increase the pace. Where do we need to go? We will continue to stay in telecommunications, but I think we need to do telecommunications and banking. The world is moving into where financial services and technology will become one thing. So we need to be there. If we could buy a stake in a bank in Lesotho, that would be prize number one. We will continue with property. We need to go into manufacturing, textiles, yes. But we've now also understood telecommunications. You can't get a phone made in Lesotho. And it's going to be a long time before you can do electronic equipment or spare parts or stuff like that. So we would like to look at moving into that sector. Call center industry. We have a reliable, believe me, telecoms infrastructure. We have a high literacy. There's no reason why we shouldn't be in the call center industry in a serious way. That's where Sekhametsi should go. Pharmaceutical, because of COVID, everybody wishes you had been in pharmaceuticals. Imagine if we owned the company that would roll out vaccines in Lesotho. That already would have been money, but we are not there. We need to be there next time. Agro industry, but two elements of the agro industry. High value products such as fisheries, I think are good, and food security products or activities, especially under irrigation. So that's that.
Thank you very much, Matjato Moteane, for your time. Thank you very much for watching. Until next time.